Okay, everyone, welcome to week 6 of our summer research program. Today, we are going to have Lauren Celano, who is the CEO of Propel Careers. It's a firm that does career coaching for people in the biotechnology industry in the Northeast area. Lauren is going to be talking about information interviews. We're going to be setting up later on some exercises using the breakout rooms. We'll tell you about them in a bit. And before we start, I wanted to remind you that next week, what we're going to be doing, we're going to have, as you requested, a working event. So right now we have 13 alumni from students in grad school, pharmacy school, programs, or other type of programs, alumni that are faculty members at different institutions or that are working in diverse industries in various fields are going to be attending. I still haven't heard from 3 of them, so the number might go up to 15, which was my goal. And on that day, what we're going to be doing, we're going to set up, also use the breakout rooms to do speed networking. So that might be a good moment for you to practice the questions that you're going to be coming up with today. That said, I will give it up to Lauren. So Lauren, the screen is all yours.
Excellent. Edgardo, thank you so much. And I'm so happy to do this. I love talking about informational interviewing. I love helping to give people insight about how best to make this useful, because this is one of the most useful tools in your journey, not just now, but throughout your career. The ability to find people, to engage with people, to ask things relevant to what you are looking for is really important. I'm also going to share these slides so that way Edgardo can forward them to all of you afterwards, so that way you've got them as a reference. And so I'm going to cover a few things. The first is going to be an overview of informational interviewing to set the stage of why do we do it? Why is it useful? And then I'll talk a little bit about what questions to ask, how to find people, and then how to follow up. And then as Edgardo mentioned, we're going to do a few interactive things throughout this webinar, so that way it's engaging, and also so that way you can learn from each other in terms of things you're thinking about for this topic. If any of you have questions while I'm talking, feel free in the chat to be able to write those, and I'll try to address those as we're talking or at the end, depending upon what makes most sense. And so the first thing, I'm curious, for those of you on the webinar, I'm wondering, how many of you are in the top bucket? And actually in the chat box here, feel free. You can put A if you're in the top bucket. If you think about roles or think about what you want to do next, like everything seems interesting. Everything is like, oh, that sounds good. Yep, that role sounds cool too, or that opportunity looks interesting. Some of you might be in the B area, where maybe there's a few roles that seem interesting and you're trying to figure out which 2 or 3 of those different titles are most interesting. And maybe some of you are in bucket C, where you know what you want to do, you just need to find someone to hire you, or something else to happen in terms of making that work. And so if you want to, no pressure, but in the chat box, feel free to put like A, B, or C. I'm just curious to see where, where you are. Oh, okay. Edgardo, you got the poll set up. Do you want to launch the poll? Okay, all right.
Yeah, I'll be the poll that actually asks these questions. So
cool.
Guys, you can go ahead and answer them.
Awesome, thank you so much. You're much more high tech than I am.
John Lee basically got us the Cadillac of Zoom accounts.
That's awesome. Good.
Okay, that's everyone.
Okay, all right, cool. We've got people in Okay, good. I'm glad no one answered the last one because you do have a choice. But excellent. We've got people in each of the categories. And so for me, I guess one of the nice things is that informational interviewing can help you kind of refine what you're looking for, can help you think about different places that might be relevant for you. But in order to help inform informational interviewing, I think it's helpful to start to think about, like, what do you want out of your career? You know, what are you looking for in a job? What are you looking for in the role that's next to you? You know, I'm hoping that many of you have written down on paper, ideally, or in an Excel spreadsheet, like a list of things that are important to you in terms of your next steps. You know, for some of you, maybe you want to work at a place at a certain location, or have certain requirements in terms of certain techniques or certain responsibilities. Maybe some of you want to work at a certain type of organization or in a certain culture and so forth. And so I'm curious in terms of, you know, thinking about things for you, you know, what are those things that are important to you? And so when I think about this, we're going to have our first breakout room where we set these up to have 3 different breakout rooms throughout the webinar. Each will be 5 minutes, and it'll be a time for each of you to discuss with your breakout group, you know, what are those things that are important to you in terms of a career. And then in terms of reporting out some of this, what Edgardo and I and Gabriella had talked about was in the chat feature, we could have one person from each breakout room write in the chat box just a few things that were important to people in that breakout room. And that way, at the end of the webinar, we'll compile the list of things that all of you shared. And that will be a nice kind of readout that we'll be able to provide everyone, just to be able to help you think about those things that could be useful for, you know, all of your careers.
Okay.
And so does anyone have any questions first before we do our first breakout? And so while we're coming back, for those of you that were note takers for your breakout room, feel free to add some comments about what was discussed in terms of things that are important to people. I'm sure we'll see some trends, and then it might be also interesting to see what might be different from different people's perspectives. Oh, you guys are very efficient. That's good. And we're seeing things like, you know, wanting a friendly work culture, wanting to do different things every day, wanting to make a difference, and so forth. Beatrice asked a great question around how can we ensure that our future goals and careers allow us to have a good work-life balance. And so it's a great question. I'll talk a little bit more about kind of using some of these questions to be able to figure out things like the work-life balance. Because in the informational interview, when you talk with people in certain roles and in certain organizations, you can ask them, like, what's your work-life balance look like? What's an average day look like? Are you allowed to take vacation? You know, are you allowed to not check emails on the weekends? I mean, no question is really off limits in terms of things. And that's where being able to customize some of these questions that you have can be really helpful to then find answers that are useful for your own decision making. Cool. Thank you, everyone, for contributing to the content. So in terms of informational interviewing, so this is an interview meant for you to gain insights about a certain role or about a certain organization or a certain career field or career path, to basically help inform what you may want to do next. An informational interview is not a job interview, but it has led to job interviews. I've seen it firsthand where you have a discussion with someone and they enjoy the conversation. It turns out their organization might be hiring. So it's kind of a nice way for them to get to know someone really understand what you are looking for, and then perhaps, make a nice match in terms of opportunities. But the biggest thing is, this is for you to be able to understand what may be next. And so I guess we have our next poll up. So thanks, Edgardo. And the next poll is going to be, what are the main concerns, if you have main concerns, about doing informational interviews? And I ask this question mostly because I'm curious to get a feel, because some people get super stressed out by doing them, and there's different reasons why. But hopefully through this talk, I'll be able to give some suggestions, ideas, ways to make it less stressful and hopefully more useful for all of you.
I think everybody has voted. I'm just missing one, and I'm assuming that's you, Lauren. So let's end this.
Okay, awesome. We have a mix. We have a whole mix of, and I'm going to touch on things like what to ask and how to reach out to people, and a few tips in terms of how to find people and how to follow up. And for those of you that wrote other things concern me, if you want to, in the chat box, maybe you could write what the other thing is. No pressure though. If you don't want to share, that's okay also. But we can try to address it if it's something that that we could help with. And then a few of you, I guess, do these. And so hopefully in the next 2 breakout rooms, then those that aren't concerned at all may be able to share some guidance then for the people that you'll be with. And so one thing I want to mention, because I know that many of you are thinking about different things in terms of what's next for your career. And so informational interviews are certainly useful to find out about jobs and companies and culture and such, but they're also useful if you're thinking about additional schooling. They're useful for that, to understand, is this university or is this department, is this program relevant to what I'm looking for? Is it going to be a good fit, for me? And these are also really useful in terms of even thinking about the longer term career path for all of you, to make sure that you're building skills and building experiences to get you to where you want to be in 5 years time, 10 years time, or longer. And so this is something that can be done throughout your career to help you plan and hopefully be more, focused and more aligned in what you do. And so in terms of what to ask about, I'm going to cover a few things, focusing on, if it's a certain role or a certain program that might be of interest, or maybe you want to learn more about the organization to understand if that's a fit, or more about a certain career progression to know what you may have to do to get to a certain level. And then, of course, many of you might be thinking, well, how do I just get in to what's next? And so depending upon where you are, if it's a certain job, for example, then finding people that are in that role and asking them, like, what do you actually do as a scientist at a certain place, or as a medical writer at a certain place, or whatever title you might be thinking about, to try to understand what actually is your day like, or what is your week like? Because a few of you mentioned about not wanting a routine job, wanting something that's a bit dynamic, where there's lots of different things going on every day. So it would be good to understand if that could be the case. Also asking people things like, what do you like about your job, and what might you change if you could change anything about your role? What's the growth potential? If I were to start off in a certain title, what could the possibilities be next in terms of titles, in terms of opportunities? What are some of the skills that might be needed? So that way it can give you a sense of, maybe how to focus your resume or how to build skills or gain experiences if needed for certain titles. In terms of the organization, asking things like, well, what's the culture like? A few of you mentioned comments around, having good work-life balance, having, supportive environments. So then you could certainly dive deeper, into that. So you can understand, are they supportive for different, aspects? What's the environment like? What's the management style like? Is this a very matrix organization? Is it a very supportive organization? Is it chaotic? Are there always these fires people are putting out? Not literal fires, but like these problems that keep coming up and it's like super stressful. Some people love stress, so fine, maybe that's great, but most people try to avoid that and so forth. What kind of personalities thrive in the organization? What kind of skills are valued? Because certain organizations value different experiences, different backgrounds. They have different weights on leadership versus, community service activities versus other things that perhaps you've done. For those of you who are thinking about certain, like titles and areas, maybe where you want to be in 10 years' time, you could find people that are in those roles now and ask them, if you could go back in time, what would you have told yourself to be even more successful or even more established at this point in time to help plan? And then, of course, the career entry side. How did you get into this job? What networking organizations might you be aware of that I can learn more about this area? And things like that. And I'm sure there's lots of other questions and details that many of you might be thinking about. In addition, I like asking questions too. How is your organization different than others in the same space, to maybe learn a bit more about what makes their group unique? Or, is there anyone else I could talk with based upon what you know about my interests and background? Do you know anyone else that might be helpful? Are there market research reports, or are there certain blogs you follow to keep on top of your area? Sometimes having more of the knowledge of a certain space or having more insights, even about the terminology. It's kind of like, for some of these roles that some of you may go into, it's almost like learning another language because of all the acronyms and just different things that people may use. And so being able to read more about that or kind of understand some of those things might make you feel more confident as you're interviewing for places. I love asking, have you seen other roles that someone has done with my background? Because you might be thinking about certain titles, but it could be feasible that there might be 5 to 10 different areas that could totally be a fit for your background. You just might not know what those roles are called. And so now if you can know that, then it might open up a whole other area. Do you have other advice or suggestions for me? And so forth. And so the key is having questions, engaging the person that you're talking with, because so many times people will come to me and say, Lauren, I tried doing informational interviewing and it wasn't really useful. And then I'll say, well, okay, what questions did you ask? And they'll say, but I just let them talk, and I didn't really have any questions because I wanted to let them talk. And well, you just don't want to take the chance of someone talking about things that aren't relevant to you. So come prepared with 10 or so questions. You may not be able to ask all of them, but at least, you'll be thinking about that. You can also, because I know sometimes this makes people really nervous, you can also ask things like, what's the average salary for X role? I mean, you can't ask someone, what are they getting paid? But you can certainly say, I'm curious about numbers, just so you have an idea of what to expect. And again, the growth trajectory, what do people do after this role? Just so, again, you have a sense of where things could evolve. I know that was a long list of things to think about. And certainly there's many more questions that you can mention. So, Edgardo, I love your comment. Your favorite question is, what advice would you give yourself at my stage? 100%, because I can guarantee you, people will have insights that may be able to help you avoid problems that maybe they face, or just get you like on a quicker trajectory in terms of getting to the point where you can continue to make an impact. Awesome. Okay, so in our next breakout room, it'll be 5 minutes, similar to last time. And we'd love to have each of you talk about, you know, what are a few questions that you would love to ask if you had the opportunity to do an informational interview. And it can be some of the same questions that I mentioned, or it can be totally new ones. The goal here, I think, is to get a feel for what's on your mind, what's important to each of you. And, you know, in the first breakout room, having the idea of, you know, some things that are important to you, then that helps you shape some of the questions, because then you can try to make sure that you're assessing, you know, fit and relevancy for yourself. I imagine we're going to get a wide range of responses that come back. Nice. Frank, I think you were the first person last time too. You're very efficient in terms of, oh no, okay, you're maybe the second person, but good. Yeah, this is great. You know, what's a normal day look like? What are some of your responsibilities? How consistent day to day? How flexible is the role? I know in my group, we were asking about, you know, if you could ask if your organization could cover tuition for additional schooling. I think that's a great question to ask, to give you a sense of additional professional growth for you as things evolve.
I have shared with the students about the time that I was in the process when I was between jobs, and one of the questions you suggested to me that I got the most out of was, what does success look like to you?
Oh, nice one. Yep.
And people would take it in whatever direction: success in a day-to-day work, success in their career, success in their position. By leaving it very open, they would be the ones deciding what type of success they wanted to talk about.
Mm-hmm. And it was probably useful for you, because that maybe gave you a sense of their personality, also what's important to them, how, you know, it's like things that, as you reflect on it, can become quite useful as you think about different paths that make sense. Nice. This is great. We have such a nice list of questions. And so, yeah, we're going to be saving the chat, so that way we'll share that with you guys. Cool. I love that. Even a few comments around chances of getting a promotion. You know, just it's nice to start planning your time, so that way you have an idea of what your career could look like in the next 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. You know, some of you have maybe 40 years to work after this point in time. It's kind of daunting to think about that, but you've got lots of time to really make an impact. So in terms of a few logistical details, usually these could be like 15 to 30 minutes in length, but definitely I've seen them go for an hour. I've seen them go for 2 hours. So one thing I would like to stress is that if you set up informational interviews, don't set up 8 of them in the same day, back to back, because inevitably 1 or 2 or more may run over. So you want to have time in between to be able to reflect and refine. They can be done, of course, many ways. So maybe not in person right now, but at some point, hopefully. But phone or Skype is great. And the nice thing about phone or Skype is you can reach out to people that are in different locations and easily connect. And so that's helpful, because sometimes people worry, or they'll say to me, well, Lauren, you know, if I want to be in this certain job, why would I talk to someone in Chicago in that type of job? Because I should talk to people in New York. And sure, you should talk to people probably that are closer to you, because maybe they have a better idea of the nuances around the roles in your geographic area. But talking to people in a similar role in other places could certainly be useful in terms of thinking about career path, thinking about skills that are needed. So you can think broadly about who you might know that could be helpful. When I reach out to people for informational interviews, I like to include either a copy of my resume or LinkedIn profile, just so they have some idea of who you are, or your CV, whatever you feel comfortable sharing. Otherwise, you spend the first, 10 or 15 minutes of a 30-minute discussion just talking about yourself. And whereas they could have looked at your information before, got kind of an idea of what you're thinking, and then you can maximize the time when you're together. And referrals are helpful. I'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of connecting with people and engaging with people. You're lucky to have someone like Edgardo with you, because you got a great network. There's lots of people that you've engaged with and know. And so it's useful to be able to leverage people around you to make connections. I do like to email the person that I'll be speaking with ahead of time with a few questions, just to be able to help them think about responses before we get together. I mean, I wouldn't send them 35 questions because that might be a bit overwhelming, but you could pick, 4 or 5 that just seem really relevant. And certainly you could ask more as things progress. Here's a sample intro email that that you could use. And certainly everything here in purple can be easily modified for your particular interests. If you get a referral, I like in the subject line of the email to put referral from the person's name, informational interview request, or it could be maybe you have something in common, like fellow John J. student, informational interview request, because perhaps if they went to your university, then they might be like, oh yeah, okay, I know that, let me respond. Just something in the subject line that catches someone's attention. Too often people put just like information request or maybe no subject line. And sometimes people that you might be reaching out to get hundreds of emails a day. And so if they don't recognize it, they might not answer it, not because they're not interested, but because they just don't see it. And then of course, I like keeping the note succinct, but detailed. So, dear Lisa, John suggested I reach out. I'm writing to see if you have, 15 to 30 minutes for an informational interview. And then I like giving a short description. I'm currently, to provide a brief description. I'm currently a student, here. I'll be finishing up in a few months, or whatever, whatever you want to write in that context. I'm looking for a insert type of role, perhaps in a certain type of environment. Through the discussion, I'm looking to learn more about, X, Y, Z, and so forth. And then of course, include your name. And then I like including my phone number and email on the email. So that way, it used to be that some people you might reach out to, maybe they were, sitting in the train station, waiting to catch the train home, and they see the note and they just call you real quick. Hey, I got a few minutes, let's just have a call. And so now, of course, we're not really traveling and doing as many things. People are home more, but anyway, I still like having contact details in the actual email. So that way it allows people to connect with you without having to worry about where to find your information from. The next breakout room, because I was curious also, because some people that I have talked with about informational interviewing are afraid to ask certain questions or afraid to how to phrase certain questions in terms of things. And so I wanted to do a breakout room out of curiosity to see, like, are there things you're worried to ask about? Are there things that you're not sure how to ask about? Because we can also try to brainstorm on that as well. And then when we come back, we'll talk more about networking and engaging and trying to make sure that we're maximizing those types of activities. And similar to last time, this would be 5 minutes, and we'll have someone that can take notes. And then I'm just curious to see what will come up in terms of any concerns about things to ask about.
Okay. Lauren, I'm going to assign you to a different room. I didn't know that I could do this so that, you can meet.
Oh, cool.
And I'm going to then, hold on. Too many people in one group, too few in another. Okay, I am going to, hold on, give me a second, and I'm gonna create and send people out in a moment, okay?
Awesome.
Here.
You guys are getting very efficient. Oh, okay. I see some nice questions coming up on the chat box with this. I'll just mention a few real quick, and then again we'll send more out. But a few of you I see some questions around maternity leave, paternity leave. What's the policy on that? I see some questions around kind of, what's expected raises that happen every year. What's the, performance review process look like? What are, can I take a gap year? Is that going to look, bad in this particular career path, or is that something that's feasible? How would I talk about that in an interview? What's the salary? How often can I take breaks and vacations? Because, sometimes these organizations have unlimited vacation, and then you find out that, well, that kind of means no one really takes any because everyone feels guilty by doing it. And so that's not helpful if you actually like vacation. So honestly, asking questions about that, do people actually take vacation? How stressful is your role? How has it changed since you've been here? These types of questions are certainly things that could be, that you can certainly ask about, because, most people will be honest, especially if there's a connection there. One thing that came up in my breakout room was, how do you ask about some of these questions, like what are the benefits and what are the vacation days? How do you ask about those and not seem like you just want to take vacation all the time and you only care about benefits and such? And so I often suggest to people, don't have those questions be the first question you ask, because then people might think, okay, maybe you only care about vacation. But certainly if you have if you have 4 to 6 questions about the role, about responsibility, about growth trajectory and such, as you get towards the end of your questions, you can certainly ask questions around the vacations or around benefits or around, how often is performance reviews measured? How often do salaries increase? What are the hours like in terms of shifts or in terms of kind of week to week? So the key is, the important thing is asking the questions and being able to get, insights there that can help. A few of you also asked, and then I'll dive into networking, how should you dress for some of these informational interviews? And I know it's different now that we're all on computers. So theoretically now, only from the half of your body up, should you look professional? I mean, ideally, I would look professional everywhere in your body, but, so have a nice shirt on or have a nice, dress on or something that looks presentable, because in theory, you want to try to make the person realize that you're taking this seriously. So it's not like you want to wake up and just, put a sweatshirt on and maybe haven't showered and then talk to someone. That might not be a good impression. But, if you take it seriously, like, trying to present well, as if you were heading out somewhere or something, that should be fine in terms of the interaction and so forth. So in terms of finding people, I know a few of you are probably nervous about how do you reach out? How do you identify people? How do you engage with people? Some of you have concerns about, how do I reach out to people that are way more senior than I am? And so one thing I want to stress is that one of the nice things about being a student is, well, at some point, your student status has to end, in the sense that hopefully you graduate. So you can't be a student forever, which means that you have to do something afterwards. And so all of you should be exploring what's next, because you have to. If you have a natural jumping off point, that will be your next endeavor once school is done. So people should be expecting that you're trying to learn about what's next, and they'll probably appreciate that you're learning about career paths, you're trying to find the right path for you by doing informational interviews. So as a student, it's a lot easier to get access to people, even ones that are in high-level positions. Once you're not a student, it makes it more challenging, because then you don't always have this natural transition point in terms of why you're reaching out. So I suggest to people So never be shy about reaching out, because you're supposed to be learning about what's next, because that's part of the role of, being a student. And so when you think about people, there could be a lot of people that people that you are doing research with, or have done research with, or have worked with, whether it's for, internships, full-time roles, volunteer activities. There might be a number of different people that that could be useful in terms of your future, career endeavors. Of course, friends are useful. And sometimes I'll use an example for biotech. I have friends that are architects and that do accounting and do things that are not necessarily biotech related. And so some of my friends would say, well, Lauren, why would I reach out to the accounting friends? Because why are they going to be helpful if I want to work in a biotech company? Well, maybe they do the accounting for biotech places. You just never know who your friends know. And so I suggest, when you're reaching out to people, let people know who you're thinking about reaching out to. And they might be able to let you know, oh, I know someone in X title. Let me see if they'd be able to help you. You just never know. Mentors, of course, are useful. Alumni organizations are useful. So certainly reach out to alumni from this institution. If you're a part of certain organizations, there's a whole bunch of different, Society for Neuroscience, Cancer Research Group. There's, Young Professional Research Networks. There's New York Academy of Sciences has some great things. There's all sorts of groups that maybe you're involved with that you can reach out to people that are also involved with. We'll talk about LinkedIn in a second. But the other thing is, maybe there are some people that write blogs or speak about your area of interest. They might be thrilled to hear from someone who's a student who really admires the work they do. So don't underestimate who you might be able to connect with. You might be surprised. The key is kind of reach out, and people might be happy, especially now with COVID being so stressful. People want to feel like they're helping people. And so by doing an informational interview with one of you, you literally might have been the highlight of someone's day, because they get to talk about something like how cool their job is, as opposed to the nitty gritty of what they're doing in a basis. Cool. Awesome. And Kat just mentioned something in here that, you just never know who you know. And so much hiring happens via networking. So many jobs are created for people. It's just amazing in terms of how that works. And then, okay, so when we're allowed to go to meetings again, if any of you attend any sort of scientific conferences or meetings in your fields of interest, poster sessions are awesome. Coffee sessions are great. Exhibit halls are great because you get to meet a lot of people. I know we can't do that now, but leverage these things, because then you can connect with a lot of people that you can then follow up with later in terms of advice or insights. And so I'm also hoping that as you're doing your job search, you're making a list of organizations of interest and then relevant titles that seem interesting, because there might be a number of titles that are relevant for you only because different organizations call things different titles. It makes it really annoying from a job seeking perspective, but it's just important to mention that. But if you have a nice target list, then you can share that with people and say, okay, I'm looking to work in these types of places. Do you know others that are similar to them? Or I'm looking for these titles. Do you know others that I should be on the lookout for? Because then you can at least continue to cast a wide net. It's good to utilize, or I guess empower your network to help you. So that way it hopefully makes your search a little bit less stressful and less intense. And so in the chat box, if you guys want to, I'd be curious to know, what's the title of someone that you'd love to talk to? Or what's an organization you would love to connect with to learn more about what they do? Because what's fascinating is, even within our collective network of people in this webinar, we might know people at some of the places that you're thinking about. So it's just fascinating to kind of use that. Maybe some of your parents or sisters or brothers or cousins or friends or whatever, maybe work in some of these places or know people, or someone that you play soccer with seems to know someone there. It's just connections come from so many places. It's amazing. So we're getting a few around, you know, certain titles like chemical engineer, analytical chemist, you know, or finding someone at a place like Dow, you know. And I guess one thing to keep in mind, okay, if you wanted to be a chemical engineer at Dow, of course, talking to a chemical engineer at Dow would be great. But even if you talk to someone in operations at Dow, they still might be helpful because they might be able to give you a sense of the culture, the environment, the benefits and such. And maybe they know someone in the chemical engineering group that they could connect you with. And so you could think broadly about kind of what those connections could look like. And a few of you are mentioning government agencies, and I can guarantee you that like job searching via the government websites is, let's just say, cumbersome. If any of you have ever looked at the websites, try to search for roles. So finding someone in places, in government departments of interest is very helpful to give you a sense of how do you navigate the career page? What do you actually look for? What's the hiring timelines look like? What's the process? And things like that. It's fascinating. So LinkedIn is a extremely useful tool. And I'm hoping all of you have LinkedIn profiles and details and things like that. But the cool thing is, if you have your target list of either organizations or of titles, you can now use LinkedIn to search to find people that are in those places. And so what's cool is, and I'm hoping most of you have done this, where you can search up here by title, whatever title interests you, and then you can filter, if you hit the filter tab, by a whole range of things. And so, like, for example, to put Edgardo on the spot, if you were connected to him on LinkedIn, and if you wanted to know someone that was in this title, and you put in connections of Edgardo, people might pop up, and then you could ask him, hey, I see you know 2 people at Dow. Could you make a connection for me to learn more? So you could sort by, if you were first degree with someone, you could sort by that, which is awesome. You could sort by location, of course. You could search by companies that people may have worked at or currently do work at, because sometimes it's nice to talk to people that maybe were somewhere, so they might be a bit more real with you about what the culture actually is like versus someone that is working there now. And you could also filter by schools. This is where the alumni network becomes super helpful. You can sort by, again, certain titles. You can like sub-specialize in terms of how you sort, but it can be really interesting to see who you might know that might know people that can be helpful for you to connect with. And when it comes to connecting with people, this is my sister, so I can use her profile publicly, but if you are first degree with someone on LinkedIn, there's a tab here, and if you hit that contact info, usually their email address pops up. So I would suggest email them, dear Emily, I see you have a connection of someone, John Smith at X place. Could you make an intro? And that way you can email attach your resume. And that way you can then, she might be able to forward it to the person, as opposed to hoping she checks in mail and then hoping he checks in mail. And then you never know, someone might not get back. And so I just not everyone's aware that this contact info tab has email address information typically, there. So if you take a little bit of time, you can then go from second degree or first degree to second degree and such. And then Edgardo mentioned about some like free groups in the Leadership Alliance Connect and such, which can be super helpful in terms of engaging with networks and really, leveraging different connections. Cool, awesome, and Saxmus too. Definitely, you want to make sure also, I guess, that you're building out your LinkedIn profile, so that way when you reach out to people for informational interviews, they might look you up on LinkedIn to be able to then look at your background, or maybe even connect with you so they can be more helpful, or you can be more helpful looking through their people and then seeing if there's people they know that could be a fit. And so just keep that in mind too. I don't want to scare anyone, but it's nice to be able to continue to develop this so that way you've got, you know, maybe a nice title in your profile. You've got maybe an about section where you talk about your passion for pathology or your passion for, you know, chemical engineering or whatever it is that interests you. And then you have details about maybe course relevant projects, about internships, about volunteer experiences, about work experiences. So that way people have a good feel for some of the things you've done, but more importantly, you know, what are you looking for? And the fact is, since many of you, or since all of you are students, sometimes students can be a bit more open about what they're looking for next. Once you have a job at Dow, you can't just put looking for a new opportunity, because that would be awkward if HR person at Dow saw that. But as a, you know, since you're in this kind of stage now, you may be able to be more open about things. At the end of the discussion, you can certainly ask, you know, is there anything else I can help you with? Because you never know what may come up. In some cases, like literally, when I've had informational interviews, there's been a few people that, let's say they're new to Boston. So when I ask this question, they'll say, well, you've lived in Boston for a while. Can you give me any insights about places I can go with my kids to like spend an afternoon? Or can you tell me your favorite restaurant in, you know, this area? Or can you tell me a little more about what the hiking is like in New Hampshire? I mean, you just never know what someone might ask about, but it's just a nice way to build a connection and kind of commonality with people. So that's one thing. And some of you might be thinking, but I'm just a student. What do I know? Again, you have insights about the fields that you're studying. You have insights about trends in your specific areas. So you do have things that could be helpful for people to know. In addition, if you were to connect with someone and maybe you had some good discussions about a certain, like a certain area of work, a certain, something around a unique thing around pathology, for example, maybe you came across a few relevant articles about that topic. And so maybe you follow up a few months later. Hey, Lisa, it was great talking to you. Thank you so much for the advice. I know we were talking about this thing. I came across some articles, just thought I'd send it in case you find it useful. If for some reason you're at, you know, virtual conferences or things like that, or if you belong to different networking groups like Women in Bio, for example, then maybe you connect on, you know, things related to that post informational interview. So that way it's a way to keep in touch and a way to engage. I guess one thing I want to mention, which I forgot to mention in the reaching out to people, some of you, you know, maybe you've been working for a bit and then, and now you're back in school and you know people from 8 years ago, but you haven't seen them since. And so some people might think, well, isn't it awkward to reach out if I haven't talked to them in 8 years and suddenly I'm reaching out to them for an informational interview? And I would say no, because this is a great time to reconnect. Like you have something in your life now where, you know, you're looking for information, you're looking for next steps, and they might be able to be helpful in terms of insights. And so even if you haven't talked to someone in a while, they might be thrilled to hear from you and thrilled that they'll be able to give some advice that might be useful. So don't worry so much if it hasn't been a while. I start off some of my emails for informational interviews saying, I know it's been a while since I've been in touch, but I'm reaching out because I thought you might have insights around X, Y, Z. And most people are happy because life gets busy for everyone. And suddenly years go by and they forget that it's been that long. You know, also, if you had a great connection with someone, if you, you know, just the information was super useful, maybe you could invite them now to more of a virtual, you know, career panel or career discussion or lunch and learn or who knows, something to be able to perhaps have them share more insights with other students and people that you know. And then if you get hired, I think it's important to keep a list of who you engaged with so then you can update them. Because it's so nice to get a note like a year after a discussion. Hey, Lauren, that discussion we had a year ago was so helpful. I'm now at, J&J in this group doing X. Like, it's really fulfilling to be able to hear what people are doing and to follow up. And so, I don't want to suggest that I love like Excel spreadsheets and keeping track of things, but when it comes to your future, I think it's good to be as organized as possible. So that way, you have your list of organizations of interest, people you reached out to, who might have referred you, the role maybe you applied to. So you have it all in one place. So then when you get a job, you now know the connections, you can follow up. It looks super professional, and people are super thrilled to be able to hear, where you are. Here's my information. Again, I'll make sure to send these slides as well, but I'd love to hear questions, comments, things you're thinking about that I can try to answer. And I'll stop my screen share in a second so we can all see each other, which is, I guess, the benefit of some of these Zoom activities. And Edgardo, thank you in the Zoom chat for putting in all these different groups so that way people can connect and engage with people in the field.
No problem at all.
You're such a good resource.
And also remember, you can also start by looking into my LinkedIn, to Dr. Davis' LinkedIn, to your faculty mentors' LinkedIn, to other faculty mentors. Sometimes those feel awkward to send that cold email to someone you've never met. So asking for a referral might be good, or maybe we don't know anyone, but we might not know someone that does. Or don't be afraid that this is a commonly used tool in professional life. So most people will be talking about when you're sending that email, even if you've never met them. And so far, I've never been turned down for one. So I'm very happy with it.
That's awesome. Well, and you're so lucky that you're learning about this so early in your career, because it is. This is ubiquitous, and it's just the earlier you can start getting comfortable with it, the earlier you can start engaging with people, just the more comfortable you'll get over time.
No one has more questions?
And if you don't want to speak your question, you can put it in the chat box to be able to mention. I guess I'll mention one comment while perhaps you guys are thinking about questions. So one of my friends, her first informational interview ever was with a CEO of a biotech company that was about 300 people, because she knew someone that knew the person. And she wanted to be a scientist, like a bench research scientist. She was coming out of her master's program, but and I asked her, I said, how many informational interviews have you done? And she said, none. I said, you're going to start with the CEO? That sounds a little bit risky, but okay, let's see what happens. And it turns out that informational interview wasn't actually helpful, because he had no idea what research was actually happening, like what cells they were using or what reagents they were working on, because he's a CEO and he's not even near the lab bench. And so the lesson of that story is more of, while you can get connections to people sometimes that might be in like super high level roles, sometimes it's better to find someone in the department or closer to the department that you want to work in, because they'll know more about the actual day-to-day life of a person in that job. And so it's totally cool if you were to informational interview someone that might have graduated 4 years ago, because they still have a lot of insight to share, and they usually know a lot more about the actual work. So it could be much more useful for you than talking with someone that's, super senior in an organization.
I guess I'll ask a question.
Awesome.
What advice would you give to a recent undergraduate who is interested in pursuing a career in biotech?
Yeah, great question, Nicholas. I mean, well, I guess, okay, there are so many avenues that you could pursue in biotech. And so I guess the first thing I would suggest is maybe trying to think a little bit about what areas of biotech do you want to be involved in? Like, and it might sound like an easy question or a simple question, but for example, do you want to work in like the preclinical group where you're evaluating stuff even before clinical trials, or do you want to work in a clinical group where it's closer to being translated to human impact, or do you want to work in a manufacturing part of biotech where you're making the gene therapy or making the cell therapy, or do you want to work in a small company where you're involved and wear lots of hats, or do you want to work in a bigger company where you're more specialized? There's a lot of things to think about in terms of that kind of question. But once you identify a little more about what areas could make sense, I would suggest start to reach out to people and start to get some kind of like feelers for what are some of these companies like, what are some of the nuances maybe between like a small biotech in Alexandria Realty's incubator in New York City versus one in Westchester County that's a bit bigger, like Regeneron, or someone in Long Island, and so forth. And so it just could be helpful. I would say just start kind of seeing about putting feelers out to people that you might know in different companies, and then it'll refine over time in terms of places that might be a fit.
Awesome, thank you.
You're welcome. We have a question in the chat around, can you give tips to overcome imposter syndrome? So many people have imposter syndrome, not just women, but women definitely seem to have it more than men. So a few things. One, and okay, not to sound obnoxious, but I suggest to people to keep a Word doc of accomplishments that you've done and things that you know. Not for the sake of saying that like you're so amazing and you're so awesome and so forth, but you are awesome and you guys are all amazing. But more that sometimes people focus on all the stuff they haven't done because no one knows everything, but all of you have done a lot. All of you have learned a lot throughout your career so far and in the programs and the courses that you've been involved in. And so it might be nice to have kind of a running list of, I know how to do PCR, I know how to do ELISA, I know how to do cell culture, I know how to do whatever the techniques are that you're familiar with, and maybe other things, maybe you presented in front of a large group, or maybe you helped contribute to a blog for a disease foundation, or who knows, whatever it might be, because then it might help you become a bit more confident in realizing that you actually have experiences and skills that are useful, and you can focus on some of the things that you have accomplished as opposed to always thinking about like the things you haven't done, because again, nobody can do everything, and there's always going to be things that you can learn over time. So that's one way to do that. We have another question about, okay, so what if you reach out to someone and they haven't gotten back? What's an appropriate time to wait for a response? Okay, before I answer that question, I'm going to suggest a few things. Do not email people like July 3rd, because you have time on July 3rd, because people are going to be on vacation and they probably may not check their emails. Or the same thing, like a few of my friends, Thanksgiving Day, they suddenly have time, right? Because people are off and other people might be cooking dinner. So then you like get a bunch of emails you send out for informational interviews. And that's probably not, because people aren't checking their emails that day and you might get lost. So assuming you didn't send out your informational interview like the day before Christmas or July 3rd or 2 a.m. on a, Saturday morning because you couldn't sleep. I think it's fine if you wait, let's say like 5 days, send the email, wait about 5 days, and then you could send another one, because maybe the person, well, in the past, maybe they were at a conference or maybe they had something else going on, so they just could not respond. I think it's appropriate to follow up 2, maybe 3 times. And if for some reason they haven't gotten back to you, then, I mean, who knows? Maybe it went to spam or something else. The other thing I would check is make sure the subject line is something like referral from Lauren Celano, or fellow John Jay student interested in forensic science, or something where it's a catchy title, because maybe the title was too broad and they missed it because they got 500 emails the same day and just thought it was random and didn't actually open it. Okay, so we have another question about what are some key things that make someone stand out in an interview or on a resume and LinkedIn? I mean, I could talk for like an hour on that alone, but I think a few things. One, in a resume and LinkedIn profile, especially for students, I love it in a resume when I see like a relevant course project section or some sort of thing to build off, not just of your internship experiences and work experiences, but maybe there are things you did as part of your coursework that showcase certain knowledge or certain skills. I think that can be really helpful to help HR managers see the depth of experience that you have. So I would suggest potentially incorporating that section in the resume to be able to highlight things you did, so that way they know, even though they weren't like properly paid work experiences, because it was part of coursework and such. And similar with LinkedIn, I mean, I love it also if people have volunteer experiences. I love when they have a nice summary on LinkedIn where they talk about, you know, in the about section, I want to make a difference in, you know, human health, and I'm passionate about building a career around cancer biology or whatever is passionate to you. And then perhaps, you know, as a student, I've been able to gain a wide variety of skills and techniques, including XYZ. You talk maybe a little bit about some of those things that you know. And then maybe you have a third paragraph, like, you know, throughout school, I've had leadership roles in XYZ organizations. I've also been able to volunteer with the, you know, Habitat for Humanity organization or things like that, where you can highlight not just the skills you know, but some of the other characteristics of leadership and collaboration and teamwork. And on the interview, just being very prepared. It's probably a longer discussion, but if you have a job description, ideally you know what they're looking for. So for each thing they ask for in the bullet points, I suggest that people write down 1 or 2 examples for each like bullet point. So that way when they ask, tell me more about X technique or tell me more about your teamwork, you have an answer already established that you can then share that looks super professional because you're very on point in terms of that. I don't mean to laugh, but what have you asked about finding people in government organizations? Because you never hear back sometimes about roles. I mean, that's a tough one because I feel like that's like a black box in terms of you apply and a lot of people never ever hear back because it's just such a cumbersome system. And a lot of government people may not be on LinkedIn because of security clearance or because of other things. So you won't always be able to find people that are in certain departments because of stuff that's outside of your control. But that's where in a perfect world, maybe you can leverage connections and maybe you can find someone in the FDA that then might know someone in another department and so forth to be able to help perhaps connect with people. Because I know that, of course, I know they hire. It's just that it's a very cumbersome and kind of daunting process in terms of that. I don't know, Edgardo, if you have a lot of experiences with like government applications and kind of, I just know it can be very complicated to go through it.
It is, and they tend to be particularly federal agencies have a lot of rules about what they can post.
Mm-hmm.
They can also talk about, but ways to advertise themselves. Every time that we have a guest speaker from a federal agency, I basically have to go over all the questions that I'm going to ask with them before, so they can ask their boss, and their boss can ask HR if they can actually show up. So.
Yeah, it's a bit complicated, but I I would say ask us, right? Maybe I know people that could help. Maybe Edgardo knows people. Maybe other people that know folks. Let's see, we have a few other questions. One of you asked about how do you go about asking your supervisor for a recommendation without sounding like you want to leave? And then when's the time to kind of move on? I mean, so I'm hoping that those of you in roles have dialogues with your boss weekly, biweekly, monthly, quarterly, at least every 6 months about progress, your development, how are you growing, what are the opportunities that exist that could happen. If you don't have those, because not everyone does them, but they should do them because people should care about your development, you may want to ask for a meeting where you can talk about kind of growth and development, and then perhaps you'll get a feel for, is there a possibility for growth? And if not, then you may have your answer where maybe you start putting feelers to see what might be out there in other places that might align more with what you're looking for. The person that asked that question, I mean, feel free to reach out to me and I can try to give some more advice around kind of navigating that without, let's say, creating red flags with the person that you're working with. Cool. Any other questions, comments? I mean, I'm hoping you guys found this helpful.
Well, I know I certainly did. Sometimes it's good to have a refresher.
Yeah, this is great. Thank you.
Awesome.
I have one last question.
Sure.
In terms of, I know usually like before you go to an interview, there's sort of like exercises or certain things that you can do to prepare yourself to mentally be ready for it. Is there any recommendations or tips that you could give us to be prepared for an informational interview, like 15 minutes before we go on one?
Yeah, well, okay, so I would definitely say, like, and I know, okay, some of this is going to sound really simple, but I can guarantee that people don't always do it. So I would definitely like look up the person beforehand online via LinkedIn, for example. So that way you might be able to help tailor some of your questions even more. You know, if the person worked at Dow and then worked at a small place, well, then you can ask a bit more about not just the job at Dow, but how did your job, what was different between Dow and the smaller place that you worked at? Or what advice would you give me if I'm not sure about big company or small company? So that sort of information can help really help you tailor things even more. You should also focus on your elevator pitch. You know, like I know we all talk about elevator pitches and you think about those as things you do if you're at cocktail parties and someone asks, so, you know, Gabriella, what do you do? And then you get to say what you do. But for the informational interview, same thing. They might start off by saying, Kevin, tell me about yourself. And then you'll say, you know, well, I'm currently a student. I have this background. I'm really interested in XYZ and blah, blah, blah. But you want to have your like 30-second elevator pitch together. So that way you can give kind of a high level view of who you are and then dive into questions and that sort of thing. And such. Some people struggle with that because they end up talking for like 10 minutes about their background. And then if you only have 20 minutes or 30 minutes in total, then you only have 20 minutes to ask questions. And then you're not able to get as much information out as you could. And you would probably have a whole separate workshop. And Edgardo probably has had a workshop on elevator pitches. And I think he's putting a few things in the chat box now about that, but really important to think about. So that way you're on point in terms of things.
And somebody mentioned how to make LinkedIn more attractive. LinkedIn has that box up front where you talk a little bit about yourself in general terms. That's a perfect place for you to put a personal brand statement about who you are, what do you do, and why do you do it.
I mean, I love seeing that, especially for people earlier in their career. It's awesome. It's cool.
Okay, so if we don't have any more questions, Lauren, thank you very much for being with us today. And I hope actually, as Kat says, I don't think we can bring you once a month, but I hope that we can continue partnering with you to come and talk to our students from now on.
That'd be awesome.
Everyone, remember we're meeting again next Friday and then the Friday after for our final event where we're going to be talking with Dr. I forgot her name again. Yahaira Sastre, Dr. Yahaira Sierra Sastre, who is training to become the first Puerto Rican female astronaut. And next week, we have so far 13 alumni coming to talk to you. You know, it's a perfect place to test out some of the questions. So
That's awesome.
Everyone next week, and keep working on your online assignments. I'm halfway through reviewing my the half of you that I'm taking care of. So if you haven't heard from me in a few weeks, I'm about to. Either today or by Tuesday, you should be getting an email from me with reminders.
You should be getting mine as well on Monday, probably.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, and I'll see you guys next week. Have a good weekend.